left the Ash Center and turn it into the Center for Democracy that it now is. Before we begin the program, the Ash Center acknowledges that Harvard University sits on the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. We also recognize the ongoing presence of the neighboring Wampanoag and Nipmuc nations. I have a few minutes. I've been given a few minutes to try to help set the stage and talk about where we are and why we are gathering here. I'll get that later. Oh, thank you. You're young. You can still bend. And I'm going to shift for just a few minutes here into my substantive role here, which is I'm a historian of democracies, and particularly of American democracy. And I have for 20 years at this school taught a course about the rise and fall of democracies. That course has become increasingly popular for reasons that are unfortunate, but it has increased my enrollments. And one of the themes of my work, of my written work, and in my teaching is that the advance of democracy in the United States and elsewhere is never, Jamie, it's never in an absolute straight line. It has been a long history of 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. And sometimes it has been 1 step forward and 2 steps backward. This is the struggle that we are engaged in now is part of a long pattern. And let me just focus that for a moment by saying a couple of words about the Voting Rights Act, the late and lamented Voting Rights Act, which, as you all know, is now effectively dead in the water. What is less known about the Voting Rights Act is what its subtitle is. Anybody know what the subtitle of the Voting Rights Act is? The subtitle is an act to enforce the 15th Amendment. Okay? The 15th Amendment was passed in 1869, maybe finally ratified in 1870. The act to enforce it came in 1965. Okay? That tells us something important, and it tells us about a gap which has been long-standing in American history, not constant, not there all the time, but there's a gap that has been there for a very long time between a rhetorical commitment to democracy and the will to actually enforce it. There have been 2 peaks, in a sense, of democratic or advances in democratic rights in the history of the United States. One occurs at the time of the 15th Amendment, during Reconstruction. This is a period when African Americans are enfranchised, at least nominally, and at least according to the Constitution. And also during the preceding years, the white working class gained the right to vote due to the abolition of property requirements and tax-paying requirements. Both of those things were rolled back in the 30 years after Reconstruction. Not only, as is well known, did African Americans lose the right to vote in the South, but there were concerted attacks on immigrant workers in particular throughout the North through all sorts of interesting devices, like citizenship requirements. Ever heard of those? Or other procedural requirements. You have to present your papers. My favorite example, which was designed to disenfranchise socialist Jews in New York City, was a requirement in New York State that everybody had to register to vote every year, and there were only 2 days on which you could register. Those days were Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Okay. So, as you all know, what we've seen more recently is another version of that. We saw tremendous advance in democratic rights in the 1960s and 1970s, 1950s, 60s, and 70s, particularly in the South, but not only in the South. And African Americans gained some political power of a sort that they hadn't gained at all in preceding decades. We've also seen during the same period, as was true in the late 19th century, very, very large waves of immigration. I think what we've been, I'm trying to contextualize where we are now, is that the reaction against democracy is a reaction against the simultaneous presence of those two things, which has recurred, not in exactly the same form as in the late 19th century, but we are, what I'm trying to say is that we are part of a long enduring American pattern of struggle and conflict. You know, the dirty little secret is that not everybody believes in democracy, or I believe in democracy for me and my friends, but not necessarily for all of you folks out there. The last comment I want to make brings this back, is to bring this back, to shift gears a little bit, and to bring us back to the university, because obviously we are here. I'm actually a member of the class of '69, and you know, we are here as members of this university, and as members of this university who are part of the struggle against authoritarianism, which is overtaking our nation. And university communities, and you know, there cliches, we can, you know, it's pretty well known that authoritarian regimes always attack universities. They attack the students, they attack the faculty, and that thus the resistance that is going on here by you folks and your friends and allies is of importance in a historical struggle. And I want to add an odd footnote to this, which is that the greatness of this university and of many other American universities was enhanced by the attacks on and collapse of the university system in Germany in the 1930s and later. Fact is, you know, it's not so visible now, but if you look at the eminent faculty who were here in the United States in the 1960s, there were an awful lot of people who were in the sciences and social sciences in particular, but not only, who were refugees from European universities. We benefited from that as universities. The world suffered entirely. But so this issue of the role of universities, the attack on universities, and the ability to resist is something that is not only visible over long periods of time, but is also cross-national. So that's the end of my comments here. And then my next job, I have a lot of different pieces of paper here, depending on particular jobs I've been assigned here. So my next job is to introduce to you one of your own members, and I hope it's on this. Yes, it's to introduce to you Helen Fairman, who's a member of the class of 1991. She's been part of the leadership team of Crimson Courage since its inception, co-chairing communications for the group. When she's not doing that, she works as a marketing and communications consultant for clean energy companies and lives in Peterborough, New Hampshire. Helen, I turn this over to you.
Thanks, Alex, for the historical perspective that sort of brings us to the moment. I want to welcome the alumni in the room and on Zoom joining us, and thank the Ash Center for hosting us, and to Professors Keyssar, Kennedy, and Sikkink, and Representative Jamie Raskin for joining us today. And also thank all of the volunteers who have done tons of work handing out 10,000 buttons, postcards, cats, to make alums, yeah, it's awesome, to make alums aware of Crimson Courage. Oh, I'm sorry. Mike, thank you. That's true. Thank you so much, Jose. Sorry. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything on the Zoom. So Crimson Courage was formed a little bit over a year ago to protect academic freedom at Harvard and beyond. We're now over 17,000 strong, and continuing to grow in 2026. I've been asked to talk a little bit about my personal history with Crimson Courage. I was one of the original petition writers. There were a number of us who wrote petitions around the attacks on Harvard, urging President Garber and the administration to stand strong. And we were very fortunate to have some extremely experienced organizers from classes around the time when University Hall was taken over, who have continued to organize throughout their lives, bring all of the petition writers together to collaborate, and that's how Crimson Courage started. So a bunch of people on the same page, and the wisdom and experience of folks who went before us and have been doing this for a long time really helped us bring together a strong group. I came to this work with a passion for both political organizing and Harvard. My sense of righteousness would not abide Harvard being attacked. And I saw actually that we were the tip of the spear, and that within this smaller community, I could actually make a difference by becoming active. I was somebody who led the effort to retain our alumni email. They wanted to get rid of it, and thank you. And I did that with a petition campaign and got thousands of signatures, and then worked with the Harvard Alumni Association to come up with a replacement for the old alumni email system. And because of that experience and the success of that, writing another petition seemed quite easy. And because of my communications experience, getting thousands of signatures was also something I knew how to do. So since we kicked off with a webinar attended by over 5,000 alumni, which is certainly the biggest webinar I've ever run. We have also gathered over 12,000 signatures from the classes of 1950, which was my uncle, who was a congressman, through 2025, over 12,000 signatures on our amicus brief in support of Harvard's suit against the federal government to try to get the money flowing again, which they won in Boston District Court. Yep. That was great. We also rallied there. Of course, the appeal has already been filed, so it's never over. We're still working on it, but our point is to let Harvard know that there are lots and lots of alums who stand behind the university standing strong and do not want the university to capitulate, and certainly not to capitulate in advance. So that's where all of you come in and are so, so important to getting that message across in a really strong way. We also have gathered well over 20,000 alumni signatures on various letters to the administration at Harvard. And that has been our approach, has not been to lobby the federal government to date. You might understand that that might be a losing battle. However, to let President Garber and his group know that we really support them standing up, and also just that we're watching, we're monitoring. We really support them, and also we're gonna notice if something starts to slip backwards, and we're gonna speak up about that. So it's a dual role. We've also spoken at Harvard clubs across the country. If you're interested in having a speaker at your local Harvard club, let us know. We've been featured in press all over the world. And we helped Harvard alumni start courage groups at their other alma maters across the country. So the idea is, you know, we threw a pebble in the water and now the ripples are going out. And it's been very, very exciting and very rewarding to see similar groups cropping up all over the country. Right now, the issue that is most on our radar is accreditation. So the latest attempt in the series of volleys from the federal administration trying to turn academics into ideology training is the threat of essentially removing all of the accreditors who say that universities are, you know, good to go, and replacing them with their own ideologues. These are mostly academics
They are people who are experienced, who know what they're talking about, who know what they're looking for. And the idea of just making this a purity test, honestly, is very, very frightening. And this is well on its way. This is a process that has started, and there will be some action on it this summer, so we'll keep you posted. But I want to let you know that our latest letter, for which you've been handed postcards, you've seen stickers with QR codes on them, all of that is to try to get you to sign that letter. So we can then say to President Garber, you know, we really want you to stand up and use your bully pulpit to tell other colleges and universities that they shouldn't cave to this, that this is not okay, and try to really work together to create the kind of academic freedom that we want and preserve the academic freedom that we had. So it also endangers academic freedom by adopting a very aggressively worded reinterpretation of civil rights law, eliminating all current federal diversity, equity, and inclusion accreditation standards as unlawful discrimination. We've seen that story before, right? In addition, this fresh wave of attacks has to be addressed by Harvard. And we are calling on Harvard to resist that pressure, refrain from any compromise that is going to hamper academic freedom, and as I said, use the bully pulpit. So everyone on your seat received a postcard, so if you didn't already have one, you have one now. Yes, they have a QR code on them, which is a little black and white square that you put your cell phone over, and it will take you directly to the form to sign on. So before we move on, just a note for the folks on the Zoom that we have the Q&A enabled, not the chat. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will incorporate them when we get to Q&A time. Right now, I want to introduce our next two speakers. Randall Kennedy is going to speak next. He's the Michael R. Klein Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. He teaches courses on contracts, criminal law, and the regulation of race relations. He attended St. Albans School and Princeton, I guess it's okay, and and Oxford, we've heard of that, and Yale Law School. Okay, whatever, every Ivy but Harvard. It's all right, he's made good. He served as the law clerk for Judge J. Skelly Wright of the United States Courts of Appeals and for Justice Thurgood Marshall of the U.S. Supreme Court. He's a member of the bar of the District of Columbia and the Supreme Court of the United States. He has written incredible books educating us about these issues. So we're very fortunate to have him. Some of you, if you were on that enormous launch webinar, have heard Professor Kennedy speak before, and we're very happy to have him back. After he speaks, Kathryn Sikkink is going to speak. She is the Ryan Family Professor of Human Rights Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's also an affiliated faculty at the Harvard Law School and the Harvard Government Department. She works on international law and norms, including the laws of war, transnational advocacy networks, the impact of human rights law and policies, and transitional justice. She has been a Fulbright Scholar in Argentina and a Guggenheim Fellow. So she's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Academy of Arts and Science, the American Philosophical Society, and the British Academy. So we are very fortunate to have these esteemed professors guide us next. So, Professor Kennedy.
Thank you for the generous introduction, and I'd most especially like to thank the people who have organized this event. I'm going to make 3 points. Point number one, I'm very proud of this community and this institution. And I want to take us back to April 14th, 2025. On April 14th, 2025, Alan Garber sent out a message saying that Harvard University was going to refuse the ultimatum that had been put before Harvard University 3 days before. An ultimatum that would have allowed the federal government to go into the innards of the academic system here and really monitor, police, control the university. And Harvard said no. And that was a great moment. I'll never forget it. I was in my office, and the email came in, and frankly, I was very afraid. I was very afraid that there was going to be a different message. And when we got that message, I shouted. I really did. I shouted. And it was a joyful shout. I think we need to remember what was going on in the winter and spring of 2025. A number of major institutions in civil society had been brought down, had been humiliated, had been made to capitulate. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll mention a couple. The CBS has been in the news recently, but in 2025, CBS settled a lawsuit that had been brought by President Trump on just the flimsiest basis. Ridiculous, actually. But CBS thought it was worthwhile to settle. Stephen Colbert suggested that it was a bribe. Indeed, it was. CBS. Law firms. Some of the leading law firms in the United States. Some of the most venerable, esteemed law firms in the United States. The one that comes to mind most immediately for me, Paul Weiss. Very distinguished law firm, long history, admirable history. A firm that had been in the forefront of hiring blacks, hiring women, being a firm that had dispatched lawyers for all sorts of good enterprises, brought low by the Trump administration. I feel sorry for what they did. Sometimes you've got, sometimes you're really in a position where, you really can't hold it against people if they capitulate, if a gun is at their temple in survival. This was not that situation, however. How many millions were you going to bring in? And, but they did. And then, Paul Weiss, I mentioned Paul Weiss, but Paul Weiss wasn't the only firm. The leading, the most profitable law firms in the United States either signed deals without even having to be forced, or refused even to sign amici briefs on behalf of the law firms that did stand up. Very sad day for the bar across the country. Well, universities, University of Pennsylvania signed a deal. Columbia University signed a deal. Harvard's turn. You know, Harvard could, I can imagine a different scenario. I can imagine Harvard actually signing and then, you know, sanding it down a bit and doing what a lot of institutions have done. That is to say, capitulated and then they deny that they capitulated. Harvard could have done that, but it didn't. It didn't. Well, that's point one, simply. I'm very proud of our community. And I think that pride, that joy, that feeling that it was a really good thing for this university to interrupt the march of the Trumpian assault on civil institutions in the United States, that feeling should buoy us. And we should, as was indicated, we should communicate that feeling to the leadership. I think it matters. That's point one. Point two. What about Harvard University and the courts? Harvard thus far has done okay in the courts. So, as you'll recall, the federal government turned off the money, froze the money that had already been really allocated to Harvard, but the Trump administration turned that off. And a week after, a week after Alan Garber's first email, he sent a second email because after the first email, the government, angry, you know, how dare you say that you're not going to sign this ultimatum? We're going to turn the money off. And then Harvard said, we're going to sue you. Now, that was the freeze. action case or the destruction of affirmative action from a couple of years ago. So this takes me actually to my third point. And my third point is, it ain't over. It ain't over. We are 1 year into the siege of Harvard. It continues. Number one, these cases, I said that Harvard has thus far obtained judicial relief. These cases are pending. They're both of the big cases that I've just mentioned. They're on appeal. I think that Harvard will prevail, but funny things happen. Funny things happen. Those cases are pending. Second, I say that, it ain't over. Oftentimes, especially in a setting like this, we might think of Harvard University as one solid collective versus the Trump administration. Actually, yeah, that's not the way it is. Harvard University is a big place, lots of different views. There are members of the Harvard community who actually think that the university had it coming. That's right. There are alums, there are members of the faculty who have publicly said that Harvard had it coming, and in fact, they are in favor of the encroachment coming from the Trump White House. We need to know that. That's just, we need to be realistic. It's not just a solid group of Harvard folks against the federal government. There's a persuasion. There needs to be persuasion. We need to talk with people because not everybody is with us on this issue, not even at this university. We need to be aware of that. Third, we've done pretty well in the courts thus far, but I think that people ought to know that in terms, if you're a litigant, Harvard University is a litigant. It's fighting the federal government. Harvard University is going to lose even if and when it prevails in court. Whenever you are in a civil liberties dispute, whenever you're in a civil liberties dispute against the government, you are going to be losing. Hopefully you will prevail in the end, but even when you prevail, what's the cost of prevailing? Lawyers are expensive. I'm not privy. I don't know how much Harvard University has spent thus far. I would hazard a guess. My guess would be at least $50 million. $50 million. I mean, you think about how might that money have been spent otherwise. And that's just up till now. Like I said, the siege is not over. It's very expensive. And that's a financial expense. We haven't talked about the expense of, attention. Our various leaders, this has been very much on their minds. It's had to be. Well, if this is on their minds, something else can't be on their minds. Time. What did I just say? These cases are still pending. Litigation is slow. It's slow. It's expensive. So even if we prevail, we will still have paid an awful cost, which is why it is so important to have in positions of authority, whether at the private institutions, the public institutions, and the government, why it is so important to have in place people who will not force the Harvards of our society to expend the resources that this university has had to expend. So, we are 1 year into the siege. Again, I think it's, I feel proud of Harvard holding the line. I hope it will continue to hold the line. I think it is more likely to hold the line if people like me and people like you tell the Harvard leadership that thus far we're proud of them, we want them to continue, and we're watching. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to begin just by echoing two things that Professor Kennedy just said. The first is that I'm proud too. I have it right down here written. I'm proud, but I'm proud of you, all of you, because of the amazing work that you've been doing in the movement that you have built. So thank you for that. I'm proud also of Harvard for holding the line. And I also doubted at the beginning that they would. And the whole atmosphere around Harvard has been better since the moment that they began to hold the line. And all the kind of petty disagreements that are always at universities, for a moment, sometimes appear to almost fall away by our agreement around this crucial issue. Now, as Helen said, I'm a scholar of international relations and human rights, but today I'm really going to talk to you with a different hat on, and I'm going to have, the hat I'm going to have on today is speaking as the co-chair of the Harvard Votes Challenge here at the Harvard Kennedy School. And why? Because it's not over, but it's not going to be over until there are elections that change this. So all the lawsuits, all the pressure, all that has to go forward, but elections are crucial and voting is crucial. And we have some interesting experience here. I've been working by over 10 years with Arkan Fung here as the faculty co-chairs of the Harvard Votes Challenge. Now that's an organization run mainly by students, and appropriately so. It is focused on expanding the vote of students, staff, and faculty. And the story that some people don't know is that traditionally students, including Harvard students, have voted at low levels. At low levels, they voted at levels that are lower than youth, than young people more generally, and levels that are dramatically lower than the general population. So in 2016, for example, the college student turnout was 48%, okay? And that was 12 points lower than the turnout for eligible voters in general, which was 60%. But campaigns to increase student voting succeeded. They succeeded, and that's really important to remember that it doesn't have to, low turnout just doesn't have to be that way. And so by 2020, as a result of organizing among students on campus all across this country, the turnout in 2020 was 70% of Harvard students voted, okay? And 66% of university students nationwide. So what we can see is that you can have a big jump in voting as a result of organizing. The midterms also, the average student vote in the U.S. colleges and universities in the 2018 midterm doubled from the previous midterm, jumping 19%. That's what college students in this country in midterms, 19% of them voted. And that doubled to the midterms in 2018 when 39% of them voted. Okay, so when you have these low numbers, you can see dramatic change. Okay, now the bad news is that student voting fell again significantly in the 2024 elections to 53%. So from the nation of 66% to 53%. We don't have the Harvard numbers yet, and we need to get them. And you know, all of this data I'm talking comes from something called the National NSOLVE, okay, which is the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. It's at Tufts University. It works with universities around the country to help us monitor, you know, our numbers around voting and turnout, and set benchmarks for us so we can work with groups like Harvard Votes Challenge to expand our voting, which we succeeded in doing. But because of that, the Trump administration has attacked NSOLVE, and they are now currently unable to issue these same reports. Okay, but you know, we've got enough numbers. We don't really need those reports. One thing we need to know is that approximately 2.3 million more college students stayed at home in 2024 than in 2020. Okay, that's a lot. That's a big number, 2.3 million more college students. And it's really important for us to figure out what happened there. And I think we have some hypotheses about it that we can talk about. Okay, but so one thing I wanted to say to you is that research on voter participation shows that personal encouragement is one of the most effective ways to increase turnout. And one of the things that happened on this campuses and on campuses all around the country to get those really great numbers in 2020 was a lot of student organizing to create, and sometimes professors were helping and sometimes professors were not helping, okay? But a lot of organizing to create an atmosphere of excitement and knowledge and on campus that got people out to vote. Now, I have a new group I just wanted to briefly talk to you about because no one talks about it, and that is, it's a group that votes at even lower numbers than U.S. students did back in 2016, and that's U.S. citizens abroad. Americans living abroad rarely vote in U.S. elections, even though U.S. policy has significant impact on them. So something between we don't even know how many U.S. citizens are abroad, but something between 3.5 to 5 million U.S. voters abroad. And the highest estimates is that 10% of them vote in presidential elections, okay? And so that is a very mobilizable, that's 4.5 million eligible overseas U.S. citizens who are not voting, but who are potentially mobilizable. So I'm just going to put an ask out here. Okay, I'm saying this to every group I talk to, and that is, if encouragement helps people vote, then why aren't we all encouraging all of our colleagues and friends abroad to make sure they vote? You know, we know that most of the people we know abroad aren't voting because you can't get that low number, 10%. That's the biggest turnout in presidential. The lower rates are 4 or 5%. You can't get that low rate. In fact, in virtually everyone you know is not voting, okay? And so the low turnout is notable because actually it's relatively easy, and here this is comparative, to vote in the US from abroad, okay? There's some countries that won't let you vote at all if you live abroad. Uruguay, where I spend time. There's some countries, Brazil, where Alex spends time, you can only vote in presidential elections, okay? There's other countries like Korea, you can only vote if you can make it to a consulate. Here we have, there's federal legislation supports it. There's just one note you have to send to request your ballot, to register and request your ballot, okay? And so compared to many of the countries of the world, we actually have more open voting. And there are excellent websites. In particular, I've been working with one, and some of my students have been working with one called the US Vote Foundation that can give you everything you need to know, because there's all sorts of myths about why you can't vote. You know, you have to give an address when you vote from abroad. And people think, oh, well, I don't live there anymore, so I couldn't possibly vote. But it's no, you have to give an address because all ballots in this country are local ballots, of course. And so they can't even send you a ballot unless they have an address where once upon a time you lived, or even once upon a time your parents lived. Okay? So I just want to encourage you to use your Crimson Courage for yet another action, not only all that you're doing to defend academic freedom, all that you're doing to support Harvard. I want you to think that the only way we're getting out of this situation is through the ballot box, ultimately. And there's a big group out there that's choosing not to vote. And we have to all make it part of our job. And it's not easy to do. We have a culture in this country where talking about voting is considered bad manners. You know, and we have to overcome that and make talking about voting part of a courageous outreach, a positive outreach that we can make to students, but also to our colleagues abroad, the people in our communities that will help ultimately contribute to bringing about change. Thank you.
Thanks. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. He's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, but is better known to all of you as Maryland's representative of Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the House of Representatives. Congressman Jamie Raskin was sworn into his 5th term, I think, at the start on January 6th of 2025. He really doesn't need much introduction here, and I want to save more.
You use the mic.
I think I have a mic on.
Move it up. Move it
What?
up. Yeah.
Move it up. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not so good at these clips on my jacket. In any case, I will be brief. Jamie Raskin is the ranking member of the House Committee on the Judiciary in the 119th Congress, and we certainly hope that he will be chair of the Judiciary Committee. Some special fate, he was first elected to Congress in 2016, an election which also brought somebody else to the White House. And I remember actually having conversations with Representative Raskin, who has been a friend of mine for 25, 30 years, having conversations about whether he should go to Trump's first inaugural address. But he went on to become the lead impeachment manager for President Trump's second impeachment and served on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. As everybody here, I assume, knows, Congressman Raskin has been one of the most courageous, articulate, forthright critics of this descent into authoritarianism. Steadfast in his advocacy of democratic reforms and democratic measures, both to protect democracy and to advance it into the future. Finally, I'll make reference to a failure that Jamie Raskin and I shared, which is many years ago, we worked together very hard. This is more than 20 years ago. We worked together very hard to try to put a right to vote in the United States Constitution. It's still shocking, there is no right to vote in the U.S. Constitution, but we worked extremely hard. We failed, but we're going to get there after he succeeds in leading us and defending ourselves right now. So, Jamie, welcome.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you, Alex Keyssar, for the beautiful introduction. And I need a mic too.
You have a hand.
That's a speaker mic.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Alex, of course, has written the definitive biography of the right to vote in America, and everybody needs to check it out. And some significant new chapters are being written right now. And I appreciate the fact that, Alex Keyssar, that you're always engaged in the struggles of the times and not just being an armchair historian. So thank you much. I'm getting to meet you guys for the first time, and I'm grateful to everybody who created Crimson Courage. Very important statement for this university and critical for stiffening the resolve of the administration to know that everybody's together. And Professor Sikkink, I want to thank you for what you said about Americans living abroad, because I took a sabbatical. This was before I was in politics, and I was living abroad, and somebody said to me, would you be interested in running as a delegate to the Democratic Convention? This is back in 2004. And I said, well, I'm not in Maryland now, I'm on, and they said, well, we've got the Democrats abroad, and we're afraid there might not be enough people who go to the caucus to do it. And so I ran. I was a delegate from Democrats abroad, and I've been a strong supporter of those groups, and they've gotten a lot stronger in the days since. So thank you for referencing that. And I also have to say hello to my my beloved professor, Randy Kennedy, who taught probably the best class I ever got to take at Harvard Law School on race, racism, and American law. And it was like being back in your class listening to you talk, Randy. And it's great to see you. And thank you for what you've been doing. And thanks to everybody here. I guess I'll pick up on the prior speakers also by expressing my pride in Harvard. I'm going to make a somewhat sharper statement about that because, like the others, I was also not certain which way things were going to go. And that angst was rooted in my own experience here as a student when the campus was in convulsions about Harvard's refusal to divest from from corporation operations in apartheid South Africa. And so the student body was very much in an uproar about this. And we felt like we got one of those, curvy explanations about why doing the wrong thing was really the right thing to do. And, the presidents and the Harvards back, the members of the board of corporations, insisted, well, we're going to engage in the Sullivan principles for, trying to make things better in South Africa, even after Reverend Leon Sullivan himself renounced the Sullivan principles and said they weren't working, and the only thing that would work would be isolation of the apartheid regime by corporate disengagement. And, then we heard, well, we will divest from corporations that have a majority of their capital invested in apartheid South Africa, which I think amounted to 0 corporations that had a majority of their operations there. And so there were a series of, successively more tortured and circuitous explanations, and that left a sour taste for a lot of the people that I went to school with. And I also shouted and yelled in glee when we saw that I think then acting president Garber was going to stand strong against this reign of authoritarianism and fear that was being imposed on the country. And it was a very great moment for America in terms of Harvard being a leading institution standing up for civil society. And I think it was also a very great moment in the history of Harvard. And so I also want to add my praise and my appreciation for what happened. And I know a lot of people I went to school with feel like it's just great to be in a situation where Harvard is on the side of the liberals and the progressives and democracy and freedom. But let me say this. The attack on Harvard, its admissions policies, its faculty hiring policies, its recruitment and retention of students from abroad, their visas, their immigration status, the rights of political expression of students here, the rights of political expression of professors here. All of that, of course, is just one small part of a broader attack on the First Amendment and civil society. And I remember, when I was in school and people would teach about civil society, and that was always like a very big abstraction, kind of an ambiguous, ethereal, amorphous thing when they talked about civil society. But right now, we are seeing civil society under attack, and we're also seeing how civil society, when it decides to, can organize and mobilize to defend the democracy and the freedom that make it possible for civil society to exist. Because in an authoritarian society and a tyranny, civil society does not exist except as an instrument of the will of the rulers. But in a free society, the academic institutions, the law firms, the not-for-profit groups, the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, all of them really do enjoy freedom. But it's clear that's a freedom that you got to fight for. But there are a lot of critical institutions under attack that don't have Harvard's resources, that don't have Harvard's power, that don't have Harvard's money to fight back. One of them is unions. One of the first things that was done during that same period in 2025 was a massive onslaught against unions, both in the public sector and the private sector. Donald Trump signed one executive order that stripped collective bargaining rights and union membership rights from 1 million federal workers as part of the move to dismantle the Department of Education and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Department of State and so on. But they went very clearly after the unions and put the AFGE and AFSCME and other public sector unions under severe attack, severe criticism and crushing investigation, and so on. We've seen the same thing, of course, across the academic sector, not just Harvard, as Randy was saying, and different institutions have responded in different ways, and some could have responded with more effectiveness and more vigor and more clarity and lucidity, and we hope that Harvard will continue to lead in that way. But we're seeing an attack on all of the parts of the First Amendment, the freedom of press and the freedom of speech. ABC right now is under severe attack by the administration because, as Bruce Springsteen put it, Donald Trump can't take a joke. And, Jimmy Kimmel means that all of the free speech and free press rights of ABC are under attack. They recently renewed their broadcast licenses, I think just a couple years ago, for all of their entities around the country. They've just recalled all of them and are making ABC defend all of them again. And this is part of the coercive shakedown tactics of Donald Trump. We saw him do it to CBS when he came in. He filed a lawsuit against CBS because, check this out, he didn't like the way that they edited an interview with Kamala Harris, right? He said that the way they edited the interview somehow violated his rights. Well, that's a novel First Amendment doctrine for you. I mean, nobody had ever heard of that. I don't like the way Fox News edits the interviews with Donald Trump, right? I can't sue them. That's not an actionable tort that gets me damages, but it got Donald Trump $16 million from them because he used the power of the FCC, the power of the state, the governmental apparatus, to hold up different things that CBS was doing. And he has been integrally involved in the mergers and the consolidations to make sure that what ends up in the final analysis is going to be media which covers him favorably. And he installed literal minders, spies, at CBS and 60 Minutes and so on to make sure that he was getting the kind of coverage that he wanted. So, all of which is to say, Harvard has done a great job, I think, standing up for Harvard and helping some of the other colleges and universities. But Harvard's got to stand up for everybody in civil society who's under attack. I'm quite certain that Harvard's legal status is 501c3. Somebody in the room will correct me if I'm wrong. The 501c3s are under severe attack by the administration. We had a hearing just this past week about the Southern Poverty Law Center, which the administration is trying to put out of business. Why? Well, the rationale for it is that the Southern Poverty Law Center is engaged in a massive fraud against their own donors. Wow, that's kind of wild to hear that. How is the Southern Poverty Law Center defrauding its donors? Because we hadn't heard any complaints from the donors. I wasn't aware of any lawsuits from the donors, had not heard of any investigations. No, the donors are being defrauded because the Southern Poverty Law Center proceeds to collect information about the Ku Klux Klan and the Aryan Nations and the extreme right groups by either planting people to go in there or by paying people to be informants. Well, the FBI has known about this for decades because the Southern Poverty Law Center has turned over the information to the FBI. It's been the basis for averting some serious, massive hate crimes and assassinations. One that got away from the Southern Poverty Law Center was the Oklahoma Federal Building bombing, where hundreds of people died and a preschool for the federal workers was blown up. Another one that got away from them was at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, where 9 African-American parishioners praying were murdered by a racist extremist. Or the same thing happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. But they've been able to stop a lot of them. And the way they do that is there's somebody who's undercover who says they're planning to blow up a church or they're planning to blow up a synagogue. And the SPLC gets the information to the FBI. And now they're calling that a fraud against the donors, even though, to my knowledge, not a single donor has complained about it. That's what the donors, like my grandparents, this was their favorite charity, Southern Poverty Law Center. That's what they loved about the SPLC, that they were so effective that they got people into there. What does a real fraud look like? Well, I'll tell you a story about something called Trump University, okay, where 9,000 people joined class action lawsuits, 3 different class action lawsuits, and they won $25 million because they were defrauded. They had all these promises of real education and real seminars with real professors and so on, and all of it was a con game. Some of them, it was like, they gave their credit card to Lyndon LaRouche for $30, and then suddenly their house is gone and their credit card is all over the world. That's what a real fraud looks like. So this is the basis for them attacking the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it's being prosecuted now by the U.S. Attorney in Alabama against the Southern Poverty Law Center. So we have another hearing coming up this week about it, and so I'm not telling you don't donate to Harvard. You should donate to Harvard, especially during these days. But if you're a fan of the Southern Poverty Law Center, now's a good time to send them a contribution and to stand strong and to tell people why. Why you're really for them. So look, all of which is to say, the First Amendment generally is under attack. Academic freedom, of course, is not mentioned in our Constitution. It's an implication of the First Amendment. But the separation of church and state is under attack, right? We just had a hearing. My Republican colleagues have formed an anti-Sharia caucus in Congress, and they want to pass an anti-Sharia law to make sure that Sharia is not the law of the land. And I got up and I said, I can save us the next 4 hours of excruciating testimony and debate. We have an anti-Sharia law. It's called the First Amendment to the Constitution. We can't establish any religion. We can't establish Sharia. We can't establish Christian law. We can't establish Jewish law, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, Amish, whatever it is. That's what the First Amendment was. So unless you guys are here just to vilify and demonize and attack our fellow citizens, which I'm sure you would never do, this hearing's a waste of time, okay? But, we're dealing with the theocratic assault on the separation of church and state on a daily basis. One of my colleagues got up not long ago on the floor to say that The moral downfall of America was 1962 in Engel versus Vitale, when the Supreme Court banned prayer in the public schools, okay? And I happened to be on the floor, and I got up and I said, you know what? The Supreme Court never banned prayer in the public schools. As long as there are pop math quizzes, there will be prayer in the public schools. Anybody can pray whenever he or she wants to pray. It's just the government can't compose a theocratic script and compel your children to participate in it. But this is going on all over the place. You saw Texas and Louisiana not long ago just endorsed the 10 Commandments and posted the 10 Commandments in every classroom. The Fifth Circuit upheld it. Now that's going to the Supreme Court. And I knew this was going to happen. My MAGA colleagues come in. They want us to endorse the 10 Commandments. They want us to post the 10 Commandments everywhere. I'm like, gee, the 10 Commandments have been doing fine for millennia without an endorsement by the House of Representatives and the Freedom Caucus. No, there's one guy, he kind of tricked me. I was confused. He said, you know the 10 Commandments are the basis for the Bill of Rights, don't you? And I was like, well, I know there's 10 in each one. You've got a point there. But wait a second. The first commandment says, thou shalt have no other God before me. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. How does the First Commandment dictate the First Amendment? We went to the Rules Committee. They wanted an up or down vote on the 10 Commandments on the floor of the House. I said, you know what? If we're going to vote on the 10 Commandments, we should have to vote on each commandment separately. The omnibus Republican package that they wanted. And you shouldn't be able to vote for any commandment you yourself have ever violated. That would be taking the name of the Lord in vain, clearly. So anyway, this is what we're doing. We're not trying to get health care for everybody in the country. We're not trying to end any of the military entanglements and illegal wars that Trump has plummeted the country into. It's culture war all the time, and the attack really is focused on the not-for-profit sector. So I think we are rightfully proud of ourselves about what Harvard has done. But Harvard and the Harvard community can play a much larger role in defending everybody in the not-for-profit sector, everybody in civil society who's under attack. And I think that should be part of the challenge for Crimson Courage. And I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you, Miles Rapoport, for inviting me, I think, or Michael and Sarah, you guys. Thanks for all of the great activists who are gathered here, and I'm honored to be with you guys today.
Set up for a quick panel so that we can take your questions. So just give us 2 minutes.
I know you don't like them. All right, good. Glad you made it. Okay. All right, good.
Yeah, you've got a little.
Thank you, Robert. Going to Philly? Yeah. So what's he want?
I was just looking for you. So here, how you doing?
You're there? Oh, that's...
Handheld mics no longer necessary. It was in the overhead mic.
I'll call you back.
I think we need another chair.
The overhead mic, so. Oh, yeah? Okay.
But it's not in the board.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Let me pull you back together if we could. My name's Michael and Sarah. I'm lucky enough to be a volunteer with Crimson Courage. And so good to see all of you here and everybody on Zoom. We've got 15 or 20 minutes for your questions to any and all of the panel, and the panel should feel free to comment about each other's responses. So first question, right over there.
So going back to your reference to the Southern Poverty Law Center, many donor-advised funds, including Fidelity, Vanguard, Charles Schwab. So regard to the Southern Poverty Law Center, many donor-advised funds, including Fidelity, Vanguard, and Charles Schwab, are restricting recommendations to donate to SPLC. Are there ways that we can advocate to get that restriction removed?
I think, Jamie, that's for you.
Yeah. I don't think I have a mic. Do we need a mic?
We're going with the above mic, so we're fine.
All right, great. So, yes, I've heard about this, that the, these are for like family.
Donor-advised funds.
Donor-advised funds.
Yeah.
For donor-advised funds, they've said you can no longer give the Southern Poverty Law Center simply because that you can't give to the SPLC simply because it's been indicted. There hasn't even been a conviction. And of course, they're going to win their case. I mean, we are winning the overwhelming number of cases in court, but it's all about harassment. And like Randy was saying, just trying to force people to spend their money, their energy, their time, their resources on defending against this nonsense. So, again, right now, if you're looking for congressional action, you are 7 months too early because, you know, we don't have any gavels, so we can't do anything. And our colleagues are very much part of this attack on SPLC. That's what the Republicans are doing. So they're not going to allow us to do anything to get out of that. But I got to believe that there's some ways to organize around this. And, you know, it's hard for me to believe that that will stand. I don't know if anybody else has worked on that issue. Yeah.
Next question.
Hi. Always good to see you. My question is for Jamie. I'm sure you have a really profound understanding of the degree to which this nefarious behavior by the Trump administration has deeply penetrated all of the institutions. How do you see us? Let's say we win. How do you see us undoing it as a practical matter? I mean, really, this is so deep now that it's a little scary, actually.
Well, it's happening institution by institution, sector by sector, university by university. And so that's going to be the only way to turn it around. It's going to be people throughout civil society standing up and turning everything around. But I agree with you. It's an extremely deep process. I hope somebody will write a book about the way that anti-Semitism was scandalously exploited for the purposes of cracking down on colleges and universities in the most appalling way. I hope we've got some, history grad students, maybe Alex as a student or somebody who could really document what happened there, because that was really an organized hit on the universities. And I saw it with my colleague Elise Stefanik in what she was doing to try to attack colleges and universities, including her alma mater, Harvard. Yeah.
Just my question, though, just for clarification, was really in government.
In government, well, for one thing, we got to call off the dogs. I mean, we're not going to be, when I'm chair of the Judiciary Committee, if that ever happens, okay, we're not going to be having hearings about the Southern Poverty Law Center and how they're defrauding people by doing their superior and indispensable work. We're going to be having hearings about how the Department of Justice has been corrupted and hollowed out to the point where they want to create a $1.8 billion political slush fund for convicted criminals who tried to kill us on January 6, 2021. We would like to investigate all of the frauds that are taking place on that side of things, at the same time that we're moving the government forward to address the crying needs of American society. And that means, we're the richest country on earth at our richest moment. How about it's time we get health care for everybody in the country and make it work? You know, so we've got a very strong positive agenda, and we also have a very strong investigative agenda into the corruption and the authoritarianism. I mean, we still don't have a complete investigation on the killers of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. That's murder. What happened? We want to know. Yes, sir.
I had a,
Here's a mic coming to you.
one return to voting and registering students. I learned something interesting when I was trying to register students to vote in Pennsylvania 2 years ago, which is students have an interesting advantage in a certain way. I would not only want to know that they're registered and get them to commit to voting, but I wanted to know where they were registered. If they happen to be registered in Maryland, sorry, Jamie, I would convince them to register in Pennsylvania, which was their right. Here at Harvard, you do the inverse and try to get them to register in their home states if it's a Pennsylvania or other swing state.
No, just yes.
Yes.
Following up on voting, I have a bunch of friends who are Americans living overseas, and I didn't quite catch the name of the organization you recommended.
So there's two websites, and they're connected. One of them is the U.S. Vote Foundation .org, and the other one is the overseasvotefoundation.org. And it's really interesting just to go there yourselves before you recommend them to people, because it's a very lively format. They dispel myths. I have learned a lot. I thought I knew about voting, and I've actually learned a lot by noodling around on those websites. And they have something called a voter journey map that really helps people navigate their way through the voting process. And so U.S. Vote Foundation or overseasvotefoundation.org is the place to go. Thank you.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the group that I referenced is called Democrats Abroad, without compromising anybody's 501c3 status or anything.
Thank you so much to the panel. I'm on the faculty at UCLA. We're also under attack. But I wanted to ask a question about the party system, because I also have tried to register students. Nobody wants to register for a party. They all want to be independent. In fact, somebody even chose the American Independent Party until I pointed out that is not being independent. So why are the parties so degraded, including the Democratic Party? So I taught a class, for instance, and I was sure that the students would be, upset about what was going on among Republicans, but they also were not happy with the Democratic Party. So I just thought, could you comment about parties a bit?
Well, Alex, you want to start, and then we'll go to Jamie?
Maybe we should go to Jamie more quickly. Look, I don't think that people who are disillusioned with the two parties are hallucinating, right? The Democratic Party has failed to deliver on a lot of its promise and a lot of its rhetoric. And so I think that that's one thing. I think that there are also cultural issues that play into this, and for reasons that Jamie can explain or comment on, but it's certainly better than I can. I think that that the divisions within the Democratic Party may also have contributed to the sense of a lack of clear purpose and a lack of clear destination. But let me hand this over to you.
Well, but I don't think we have any lack of clear purpose at this point. I mean, we are the party of democracy and freedom in America, with all of our flaws and imperfections and our inability to message and be a good messenger, as people always beat me up about. Even with all of that stuff, we are the party of democracy. And again, I'm speaking only for myself and not an institution or anything, like that. But I see some great Democrats in the room, like the McCarthys who are back there. It's a lot easier to strike a pose of, I suppose, cynical distance from parties. One book I will recommend to you, you should check out, was written by this young man who worked at Cambridge Analytica for Steve Bannon and Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And they had a very clear purpose in 2016, which was, first they were going to try to identify people who would be into Donald Trump, but were alienated from politics because they were too authoritarian. They did Facebook ads where they were looking for 3 traits. One was Machiavellianism, one was psychopathy, and the other was narcissism, if that sounds familiar to you. And they identified like 3% of the population, and then they went after those people, and they called them, and they emailed them, and, you know, next thing you know, we get the Unite the Right rally in Washington, and we get, you know, the attack on January 6th and so on. But they also had a very clear agenda of making everybody else as cynical as possible about politics and about voting and about Democrats. And, you know, it's not that we are perfect, and it's not that there have not been huge political mistakes made. The one they seized on there, specifically to try to demobilize young African-American men, I remember this one as we're talking about it, was to take the phrase of Hillary Clinton talking about super predators, remember that? And they played it over and over again and just bought all these ads on different radio stations and newspapers and so on. So they did a great job, but people shouldn't think that just because you're cynical about the parties that somehow you have, you know, you've struck gold in terms of intellectual independence. A lot of what you're doing is falling into Putin's trap and Trump's trap. So I guess I would just say, you know, John Dewey said that the only solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy, and what we're suffering from today is impediments to democracy. I agree with that very much, and I think the Democratic Party has been insufficiently democratic and insufficiently addressed to the democratic cause, which is why, you know, this is something I agree with Trump about when he talks about statehood, but not for Greenland and Canada and Panama, but for Washington, D.C. I think that's your hometown, Randy. You know, 713,000 tax-paying draftable citizens who had a genuine political grievance against the U.S. government, but didn't come down to the Capitol and beat the daylights out of our officers and hospitalize them and drive a lot of them out of police work. They've done it the right way. They've petitioned for statehood, and we got 3.5 million Americans in Puerto Rico who can't vote even in presidential elections. People in D.C. have the 23rd Amendment. So we need to get back on the democracy track. We need to defeat the Republicans, and I think you're going to see a lot more popularity coming our way in the Democratic Party. I really do.
And then we'll go way back.
Hi, Michael.
Hey there.
Hi. I had a question about some of what we've been seeing over the last year on higher education campuses is that the programs that we're winning in court about whether it be ethnic studies, whether it be gender studies, whether it be centers that are really supporting students, international students, students on the basis of race and ethnicity and all the rest, that those are we're seeing them getting closed down, including here on Harvard's campus, right? And we've seen for all of our alumni in the room, we've seen, you know, the taking out of race and religion and ethnicity is something that alumni interviewers can talk to, can report in on in terms of the interviews they're doing of students who are trying to be admitted. We're winning those cases in court. We're winning the cases on executive orders. We're winning the cases on, but we're seeing, whenever we win, we see something new, like the OMB rule that just came out, right? So my question to you is, what do all of us do in that time period where so much of this getting closed down because of the fear and because of the fact that it's taking us some time to catch up in the courts?
I'm going to say that's to Professor Kennedy.
There's nothing you can really do about catching up. That's just part of litigation. The courts are helpful, but it's always going to take time. I want to go back, you know, you talked about, let's say, DEI. I want to go back to a part of my remarks. You know, DEI has gets a very mixed reception here at Harvard. There are a very substantial part of the faculty is against DEI. It's not just the Department of Justice. It's not just the Trump people. There are, and by the way, and it's not just reactionaries. It's not just conservatives. There are people in the middle. There are people in the middle who lean liberal. who really do believe, with some justification, that the DEI regime alienated people unwisely, gratuitously, that there were some aspects of, DEI and similar sorts of reformist measures, that were destructive. And while we struggle against the Trump encroachment, I think it would be a mistake if that was the only thing that we took a look at. I think that we do have to come to grips with, problems in our own camp. I mean, and I don't think that people should be defensive about it. I think that there are plenty of well-intentioned reforms that went the way of, most human activity. They go askew a little bit. Doesn't mean that they're all bad, but I think we do have to recognize that some of the features of the pre-siege period, some of those features were getting criticized before the siege. They're being criticized now by people, some of them who are very much against Trump. And I think we have to be willing to come to grips with that and talk openly about it.
I just wanted to jump in on that because the other day I had to do training. For some grant I was doing, you have to keep up with some training, and I did some training on sexual assault issues. And I was sort of worried about what the university was doing. And what I found was that the training was happening in a kind of omnibus office that was dealing with all different forms of discrimination, including both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Okay, and I say that because of what Representative Raskin said, and that is that while I know what you say is true in terms of the misuse of anti-Semitism, the university did 2 surveys in 2024, one on anti-Semitism, one on Islamophobia, and they sent out surveys to a lot of faculty, to a lot of students, and they discovered we have both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus. A lot of it is student on student, things that students hear and say to one another. It's not very often in the classroom, but it does exist. And so one of the things I realized was they've tried to start putting all of the different issues around discrimination into one office here. And I'm wondering whether that's the kind of reform that you might be looking for.
I think that, again, it seems to me that's sensible. I will say, just drop a footnote, that's right. The president commissioned there were 2 commissions, one on anti-Semitism, one on Islamophobia. You hear about the one on Islamophobia about, once every month, maybe. I mean, it hasn't gotten much attention at all. Even though, to go back to your, even though, according to their polling, the Muslim students that were asked actually said that, they felt more put upon. I mean, the figures were much worse over there than with respect to anti-Semitism, but the fact of the matter is, the anti-Semitism report has gotten the, 95% of attention. The other one, like I say, every now and again somebody brings it up, but it does not have much attention here at all.
Just the point I wanted to make was that DEI has not disappeared on the Harvard campus. That's the point I want to make. But it has been incorporated into a broader part of campus, the campus structure. I don't understand exactly, whereas all different forms of discrimination are being dealt with in a single office.
Can I just say one more thing? It seems to me, that might be a perfectly sensible way to go. There is something that the university did, however, that at least that I did not like. So it was maybe a day or two after the April 14th, the great email. We got another email. This other email indicated, it did not say expressly, by the way, but it indicated that the DEI office had been renamed. They didn't give an explanation. They just said, they just had a whole different name. Clearly, the university was, it wanted to drop DEI. I take it because, at the instance of the administration, just like the administration said, we don't want to hear anything more about the Gulf of Mexico. It's the Gulf of America. My sense is that, the president said, well, I don't want to hear anything about DEI, so Harvard, dropped it. Now, again, these institutions are big institutions. There are a whole lot of people who pay their groceries and pay their mortgages through the checks they get from Harvard University. So there is a tremendous burden, tremendous responsibility on Alan Garber and the other people who are running the show. I, recognize that, and I think that's, we need to recognize that. And so I give them a lot of slack, to tell you the truth. But I think it's a bad thing when the university is not transparent. I think it's a bad thing when the university, without explanation, does things like that. I would much prefer the university to be totally straightforward, including we're going to change the name because actually, if we don't, we think we're going to get sued again, and we don't want to spend more millions of dollars. I wouldn't. I would say, well, you're telling it like it is, and then march on. But I did not like the way that the university handled that, and there are other things that, again, for this group, we need to be attentive. I want the university to hold the line. I truly want it to hold the line, however. And there is the possibility of the university nominally holding the line, but then, undercover, capitulating. I don't want that. If the university on its own makes a decision, okay, I might disagree with it, but it's an autonomous decision. Make that be the case. Do not engage in sort of backdoor capitulation.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Absolutely. So if I could just add one thing, changing the subject a little bit, but it still addresses the same theme, which is what are we going to do in answer to, these constant assaults? And I think that takes on particular meaning with respect to the Voting Rights Act because of the demolition of majority African-American voting districts throughout the South, which is something that the Supreme Court has been gunning for at least since 1993 with Justice O'Connor's decision in Shaw versus Reno, where they introduced this racial double standard that you can have a bizarrely drawn majority white district, but you can't have a bizarrely drawn majority black district. And now we have a complete gutting of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder and the Kelly decision. It's just the 15th Amendment is, Alex was saying, completely, turned on its head. Well, yeah, I guess this is the parallel to the discussion you guys are having about DEI. There's a big push. Well, let's try to repair the John Lewis Voting Rights or restore the Voting Rights Act with these John Lewis amendments that we've got. If we can somehow work through the basic, it's like like a tightrope the Supreme Court wants us to walk in order to justify it. But I think that we've got to be much more creative in terms of looking at universal type solutions that will guarantee everybody's right to vote. We need a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote. We need statehood for Washington and Puerto Rico. We need to just disqualify the voter suppression and disenfranchisement tactics that they're using. And, you know, in terms of representation, I mean, not all of the Deep South states have been able to do it in 2026, although a number of them have, including Louisiana and, you know, South Carolina is doing it, and maybe Alabama. But when we get to 2028, they're going to be ready. And basically, we're looking at a destruction of the majority black districts throughout the South, which is the only way, not only that African Americans get elected or the choice of the African American communities, but it's the only way that Democrats get elected down there. And then that's going to polarize our politics more. We really have to start pushing for multi-member districts with ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting, or, you know, other modes of proportional representation that will allow Democrats to get elected in the Deep South and Republicans to get elected even in California or New York or what have you. We've got to advance our politics in a way that shoot for those same goals you're talking about, but don't necessarily set us up for the same kind of attacks that we've gotten to the Voting Rights Act.
Remember Lonnie Guinier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember Lonnie Guinier.
All right, last comments, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just build on what Jamie said, because when the 15th Amendment, and I hate to bring us back all the time to the 15th Amendment, but it's important, when the 15th Amendment was passed, saying you cannot abridge or deny the right to vote people on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, there was a debate in Congress about whether there was a need for more extensive kinds of social reforms and economic reforms. And the basic decision that was made was, look, if we can enfranchise African Americans, and let's restore democracy and make these states fully democratic, then people will have the capacity to achieve these other social and economic goals by themselves. And that, you know, that was a basic premise. It may have been a little optimistic, but it was certainly a fundamental assumption that resides behind all democratic reformers, which is that if you make it more democratic and give people the power, that then they can achieve other things for themselves. But this has now been stripped by the Supreme Court is extraordinary. I mean, it really is a reversal of principles that were embedded in the 19th century.
I was told I could ask a quick question. So there is a proposal that NIH scientific grants funding determinations will be made by government appointees or administrative appointees rather than scientific peer review, and that NIH leaders are going to be replaced by administrative appointees. I was wondering what you think Congress can do about this, and this is really scary.
Well, thank you, because Congress is the Article I branch of government. We appropriate money, not Donald Trump. He keeps redirecting, rechanneling, confiscating, impounding the money that we adopt, including with the $1.8 billion political slush fund. When did we appropriate that? When did we vote on that? That never happened, so they don't have the power to do it. So again, when we take the reins in Congress, I'd like to think that we will shut that down very quickly. Of course, Trump is like a mob boss. He wants to control every dollar that leaves the federal government and then make sure that it only goes to his friends. And, you know, the first speech that I made, because I represent NIH, that's in my district, and the first speech I made was, you know, President Trump, how are you purporting not only to take the reins of appropriation for us and rechannel this money, but undermine the critical research going on into cystic fibrosis and multiple sclerosis and breast cancer and that real killer disease of our time, malignant narcissistic personality disorder.
We've got two more speakers, so stay with us. But again, thank you to the panel, and we'll bring up Gina. Is Gina here?
Thank you.
So we have two more quick speakers, and we'll be done.
Yeah. Please stay. We got really very important quick business to do. There's a reception afterwards. Hang in for a minute for Gina and for James.
Yeah, we've got two quick things. The first is you all know why you're here, right? You're here because institutional autonomy and academic freedom are essential to a functioning democracy. We've heard all about it. We know that free thought and free expression by students and academics is anti-fascist. That's why we're here. That's what we're doing. Crimson Courage and other organizations submitted 17,000 signatures to President Garber last August. With the amicus brief that Anarima helped lead in the back, who asked the question earlier, we submitted 12,000 amicus briefs, which is the biggest alumni brief ever from 50 states. We gave out over 10,000 stickers and pins today to make a showing that we are not going to be overwhelmed by the flooding of the zone that we know the administration is doing, that we're not going to turn away and pretend like it's not happening and create the conditions for a place like Harvard to give in. So what we need from you now is a continued commitment to raise your voice and take action. Because the administration is hoping that the Trump administration is hoping that the more that they do, the less we will pay attention. And the truth is, it's the opposite. We are getting more vocal. We are getting more organized. We are making sure that Harvard knows that we expect them to stand strong, that we expect them to fix some of the things that they may have given ground on, and we expect them to continue to resist. Right now, as Helen talked about in the beginning, there's a big attack on accreditation, and we are here telling the administration that we expect them to resist it. So I need to hear a couple things from you. Just give me a simple yes or no. Are you committed to paying attention to what this administration is doing to attack Harvard? Are you committed? Yes. Are you committed to telling the Harvard administration that you're paying attention and that you expect them to stand strong? Yes. And are you committed to talking to your fellow students and communities so that they too know what's going on and that they get involved? Yes. Excellent. So there is clipboards going around, which many of you have signed. If you're on the Zoom, go to crimsoncourage.com and click join us, sign up. You will have the opportunities to engage with other people from Harvard as well as other universities to continue to make sure that Harvard is the tip of the spear, that they are resisting when others aren't, that they are fixing some of the small rollbacks that they have made, and that we are continuing to stand strong in a moment where there's going to be a lot more coming at us. Professor Kennedy said it ain't over. Representative Raskin said it's not just about us, it's about other universities, it's about C3 organizations, it's about civic society, it's about students, and at the base, it's about our democracy. So be proud that you are here as part of an organization that stood up when others didn't, and we need to make sure that we continue to do that, lead here, but lead across the country. So thank you for the time you're taking. Thank you for what you're going to continue to do going forward. Thank you for being here. Let's go Crimson Courage.
Everybody always asks, where are the young people? So this year, a year ago, when the attacks on Harvard started, the students formed Students for Freedom, and we're lucky to have James with us, who helped form and lead that. James.
Thank you all for being here. I'll keep it short. I know my perception out there that we'll all get out to. But first of all, I want to give a huge round of applause to the Crimson Courage organizers here. They've done an amazing job at this event. So, as was said, my name is James McAffrey, and I was recently the co-chair of Students for Freedom, which is a coalition of Harvard students, just like Crimson Courage, pushing the university to stand up to the Trump administration. Today, I come to you as the newest member of Crimson Courage and the Harvard Alumni Association. Like many of my peers, came through a strange set of coincidences here at Harvard. I grew up in a working class family in Oklahoma. I appreciate you mentioning the bombing. It's an important thing to Oklahoma City. And it's also a very red state. Neither my parents went to college. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was an electrician, and they both worked very hard to help get me here. Now, the day before my 9th birthday, my mom took me and my sisters to a music teacher's house. We got to try a bunch of instruments, and after attempting pitifully to play the flute, I fell in love with the oboe. And now, the oboe being an expensive and very fragile instrument for a 9-year-old, I'm now a trumpet player. This was the beginning of my passion for music. Throughout middle and high school, I wanted to go into music. I practiced a lot, did lessons, went to a lot of rehearsals, and, did everything you do if you want to be a musician. Then the pandemic began, and my whole world was turned upside down. And I realized the importance of people in power and how it can impact people of all ages from all across the country. This launched my interest in politics and led me to apply to a bunch of double degree programs where I could pursue music and public service. This in turn led me to apply to a small liberal arts school outside of Boston called, you guessed it, Tufts University. After applying to Tufts and the New England Conservatory, I figured, well, I've done 2 of these applications already. I might as well throw my name in the hat at Harvard too. And when I looked at these acceptances with my mom, my reaction was basically along the lines of, that's what they're looking for? But my second thought was notable. After the shock wore off, the excitement started to wear off too, because I assumed that even if I did get in, I wouldn't be able to afford to go to Harvard. But after receiving my financial aid, I realized that Harvard was actually one of the most affordable options I had. This is the power of financial aid. It's one of those incredible innovations that allows people like me who come from working class families to end up standing before you as a graduate of Harvard. Now, this may sound like I'm gearing up to tell you to donate to the Harvard College Fund. I promise you I'm not. But in all seriousness, I tell you the story because federal financial aid is about to face the biggest threat it's experienced. Helen mentioned the accreditation threat. They are working on developing new rules on our curriculums, the governance structures, and campus services that will allow them to basically set up ideological rules that could then enable them to take away federal Pell Grants from students. Think about last year, when thousands of my international classmates were almost kicked out of the country simply because of what school they went to. Imagine what would happen if 20% of the 6,700 undergraduates that received Pell Grants lost that funding and had to scramble to figure out how to go to college still. It would be a crisis like we've never seen before. If these grants had been paused before I went to school, I wouldn't be here before you today. But I've got good news. When President Trump tried to deport my international classmates, we didn't stand by idly. Me and many other students came together and formed Students for Freedom to show Harvard that students wanted them to do the right thing. We conduct rallies, open letters, and students from all backgrounds together to push the university to do the right thing. At the same time, Crimson Courage was organizing and doing the exact same work, and we all came together. And you know what happened? President Trump backed off. Today, we're more organized than we've ever been before. We're more energized than we've ever been before. And I know that if President Trump tries to touch our financial aid, that we're all going to come together and we're going to tell him to stop. So with that, I urge all of you, if you've been involved in Crimson Courage, as everybody said, know that the fight's not over. And if you're new to Crimson Courage, I encourage you to get involved and do everything you can to be part of it, because the students are counting on your support to be able to continue to attend the school. So thank you all.
I'm really not going to speak. I want to just say 2 things. One, a huge set of thank yous. Thanks to the speakers, to Jamie for coming up. She was great. A huge thank you to the Ash Center. Christina Marchand, Jose Martinez have been terrific in getting this room together and getting everything, in ordering food for the reception. It's right outside in the back here. So anyway, major thanks to lots of people, wonderful volunteers for Crimson Courage today. But here's the second thing I want to say, which is Crimson Courage has had 1 year under its belt. It had an initial burst of energy from people who said, we need to stand up now. Here we are a year later. It ain't over, but it's in a different phase. And we need, over the next month or so, to bring in a whole new cadre of volunteers. Not because we're tired, but because the work is expanding and we need it. So Jack and Gina have been our volunteer chairs. They have the whether you're here or listening on Zoom, please ask yourself the question, am I ready to devote not a gigantic amount of time, but 4 or 5 hours a week to really making sure that this organization continues? If you can, I think we will, and we will all be the better for it. And a year from now, maybe we'll come back and say, guess what? We actually really won. Jamie, you'll be the chair of the Judiciary Committee. We'll all come testify. It'll be great. All right, so thanks very much. Have a drink, come outside, and thanks everybody. All right, Randy.